battle. It was different from the code of people he fought, but it was at least as rigid, and deviations from it were punished severely. He never read Clausewitz. To him, war wasn't an instrument of national policy. It was a chance for the individual warrior to demonstrate his skill and bravery. His code put a high premium on individual courage in combat, and the weakling or coward was crushed contemptuously. I don't even attempt to justify the Indian treatment of captured civilians and non-combatants, but nevertheless I absorbed quite a few of my grandfather's ideals and views about war, and it's downright disgusting to see him so falsely represented by authors of the run-of-the-mill Western story or movie. Well, those writers have to eat too, and maybe they can't hold an honest job. Besides, you don't still look at war the way your grandfather did, do you? Civilization requires plenty of other virtues besides courage in combat. We have plenty of better ways to display those virtues. And the real goal of the fighting man is to be alive after the war so he can go home to enjoy the things he was fighting for. No, I hadn't been in Korea long before I lost any notions I might have had of war as a glorious adventure my grandfather described it to be. It's nothing but a bloody business and should be resorted to only if everything else fails. But I still think the individual fighter could do a lot worse than follow the code that my grandfather believed in. That's so, especially since the coward usually gets shot anyway, if not by the enemy, then by his own side. Hey, it's getting late. I've got some things to do before going on watch. Be seeing you. Okay, I'll try to find something else here I haven't read yet. 8 o'clock. Still no sign of the sun. The stars didn't have the sky to themselves, however. 2 or 3 times a minute a meteor would be visible, most of them appearing to come from a point about halfway between the pole star and the eastern horizon. Harry Lightfoot stopped the elevator, opened the hatch, and stepped in. She's all yours, Harry. I've checked out with the tower. Okay. That gyro any worse? No, it seems to have steadied a bit. Nothing else gone wrong either. Looks like we're in luck for a change. Let me have the Parker, and I'll clear out. I'll think of you up here while I'm relaxing. Just imagine, a whole 24 hours off, and not even a training scheduled. Someone slipped up, I'll bet. By the way, be sure to look at the fireworks when you go out. They're better now than I've seen them at any time since they started. The meteor shower, you mean? Thanks. I'll take a look. I'll bet they're really cluttering up the radar screens. The launch control officer must be going quietly nuts. The launch control officer wasn't going nuts. Anyone who went nuts under stress simply didn't pass the psychological tests required of the prospective launch control officers. However, he was decidedly unhappy. He sat in a dimly lighted room, facing 3 oscilloscope screens. On each of them, a pie wedge section was illuminated by a white line which swept back and forth like a windshield wiper. Unlike a windshield wiper, however, it put little white blobs on the screen instead of removing them. Each blob represented something which had returned a radar echo. The center screen was his own radar. The outer 2 were televised images of the radar screens at the stations 100 miles on either side of him, part of a chain of stations extending from Alaska to Greenland. In the room behind him, and facing sets of screens similar to his, sat his assistants. They located the incoming objects on the screen and set automatic computers to determine the velocity, trajectory, and probable impact point. This information appeared as coded symbols beside the tracks on the center screen of the launch control officer, as well as all duplicate screens. The launch control officer, and he alone, had the responsibility to determine whether the parameters for a given track were compatible with an invading intercontinental ballistic missile, or whether the track represented something harmless. If he failed to launch an interceptor at a track that turned out to be hostile, it meant the death of an American city. However, if he made a habit of launching interceptors at false targets, he would soon run out of interceptors. And only under the pressure of actual war could the incredible cost of shipping in more interceptors during the winter be paid without a second thought. Normally, no more could be shipped until spring. That would mean a gap in the chain that could not be covered adequately by interceptors from the adjacent stations. His screens were never completely clear, and to complicate things, the quadrantids, which start every New Year's Day and last 4 days, were giving him additional trouble. Each track had to be analyzed, and the presence of the meteor shower greatly increased the number of tracks he had to worry about. However, the worst was past. 1 more day, and they would be over. The clutter on his screens would drop back to normal. Even under the best of circumstances, his problem was bad. He was hemmed in on one side by physics and on the other by arithmetic. The most probable direction for an attack was from over the pole. His radar beam bent only slightly to follow the curve of the Earth. At great range, the lower edge of the beam was too far above the Earth's surface to detect anything of military significance. On a minimum altitude trajectory, an ICBM aimed at North America would not be visible until it reached 83 degrees north latitude on the other side of the pole. One of his interceptors took 385 seconds to match trajectories with such a missile, and the match occurred only 2 degrees of latitude south of the station. The invading missile traveled 1 degree of latitude in 14 seconds. Thus he had to launch the interceptor when the missile was 27 degrees from intercept. This turned out to be 85 degrees north latitude on the other side of the pole. This left him at most 30 seconds to decide whether or not to intercept a track crossing the pole. And if several tracks were present, he had to split that time among them. If too many tracks appeared, he would have to turn over portions of the sky to his assistants and let them make decisions about launching. This would happen only if he felt an attack was in progress, however. Low-altitude satellites presented him with a serious problem, since there is not a whole lot of difference between the orbit of such a satellite and the trajectory of an ICBM. Fortunately, most satellite orbits were catalogued and available for comparison with incoming tracks. However, once in a while an unannounced satellite was launched, and these could cause trouble. Only the previous week, at a station down the line, an interceptor had been launched at an unannounced satellite. Had the pilot not realized what he was chasing and held his fire, the international complications could have been serious. It was hard to imagine World War III being started by an erroneous interceptor launching, but the State Department would be hard put to soothe the feelings of some intensely nationalistic country whose expensive new satellite had been shot down. Such mistakes were bound to occur, but the launch control officer preferred that they were made when someone else, not he, was on watch. For this reason, he attempted to anticipate all known satellites so they would be recognized as soon as they appeared. According to the notes he had made before coming on watch, one of the UN's weather satellites was due over shortly. A blip appeared on the screen just beyond the 83-degree latitude line, across the pole. He checked the time with the satellite ephemeris. If this were the satellite, it was 90 seconds early. That was too much error in the predicted orbit of a well-known satellite. Symbols sprang into existence beside the track. It was not quite high enough for the satellite, and the velocity was too low, and the white line swept back across the screen again. More symbols appeared beside the track. Probable impact point was about 40 degrees latitude. It certainly wasn't the satellite. 2 more blips appeared on the screen at velocities and altitudes similar to the first. Each swipe of the white line left more new tracks on the screen, and the screens of the adjacent stations were showing similar behavior. These couldn't be meteors. The launch control officer slapped his hand down on a red push button set into the arm of his chair and spoke into his mic. "Red alert. Attack is in progress." Then, switching to another channel, he spoke to his assistants. "Take your pre-assigned sectors. Launch 1 interceptor at each track identified as hostile." He hadn't enough interceptors to double up on an attack of this size, and a quick glance at the screens for the adjacent stations showed he could expect no help from them. They would have their hands full. In theory, 1 interceptor could handle a missile all by itself, but the theory had never been tried in combat. That lack was about to be supplied. Harry Lightfoot heard the alarm over the intercom. He vaguely understood what would happen before his launch order came. As each track was identified as hostile, a computer would be assigned to it. It would compute the correct time of launch, select an interceptor, and order it off the ground at the correct time. During the climb to intercept, the computer would radio steering signals to the interceptor to assure that the intercept took place in the most efficient fashion. He knew RI-276 had been selected when a green light on the instrument panel flashed on, and a clock dial started indicating the seconds until launch. Just as the clock reached 0, a relay closed behind the instrument panel. The solid fuel booster ignited with a roar. He was squashed back into his couch under 4G's acceleration. Gyroscopes and acceleration measuring instruments determined the actual trajectory of the ship. The navigation computer compared the actual trajectory with the trajectory set in before takeoff. When a deviation from the preset trajectory occurred, the autopilot steered the ship back to the proper trajectory. As the computer on the ground obtained better velocity and position information about the missile from the ground radar, it sent course corrections to the ship, which were accepted in the computer as changes to the preset trajectory. The navigation computer hummed and buzzed. Lights flickered on and off on the instrument panel. Relays clicked behind the panel. The ship steered itself towards the correct intercept point. All this automatic operation was required because no merely human